Hello and welcome to another Digital Foundry dev interview. This time we're talking to a very special guest, and to do that, I am joined by Audi Surly.
How's it going, John? Good to see you again.
Likewise, and the reason you're here is because this one is a little bit more retro oriented, if you will, and also he's a good friend of the show and just an awesome dude all around. This is Modern Vintage Gamer. Welcome.
What's going on, gentlemen? Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. Audi, I like the beard game you've got going on. Not at my level yet, but you're getting there.
Yeah. It's my Patreon beard, or
he's
the
gearing up
Asterix
to
mustache.
Yeah, exactly. He's gearing up to cosplay as Asterix. he's getting there.
All summer long.
I like it.
It's gonna happen.
I like it.
But the reason we're here is so obviously you also do YouTube videos like us, but you're better known for your development work. Going back many years, you've done a lot of fantastic emulation stuff, going back to like the original Xbox and beyond, and you've shown a lot of this stuff on your channel. But very recently you had an opportunity to work with limited run games and WayForward to bring back the original Shantae for Game Boy Color, and you wrote your own emulation for this specific project, the whole front end and everything, just to ensure that it's presented in the best possible way. And I know this to the viewers, this might seem like a trivial thing. It's a Game Boy Color game. What's so difficult about that? But there are actually challenges to this to make it into a high quality product as it is. So first of all, I guess let's talk about how the heck you got into this. Like, how did you wind up working on Shantae?
Well, it all started back in 2019. You mentioned, my YouTube and the work that I've done in the homebrew communities. That's really how it all got me noticed. So in 2019, I made a video about Diablo on the Switch. So I actually made a port of Diablo on the Switch in a homebrew capacity as, just as open source, and I released it out there. And I didn't realize how widespread the media attention that this port had received. There was Kotaku with headlines that said Diablo's on the Switch, but it's not official or something like that. And there was a lot of attention on this. And I got to be honest, guys, I was feeling a little nervous because I wasn't sure if Activision and Bobby Kotick was going to come after me, or if Nintendo was going to come after me. I've had some issues with Nintendo in the past. So I thought, well, you know what? Any publicity is good publicity. I'm not doing anything illegal here. It's all open source. It's all homebrew. It's all, it's all clean room stuff. But the great thing that happened out of that was Limited Run Games recognized the work that I'd done, and Joe, who works there as the development director, actually sent me a DM probably a couple of months after the Diablo video and said, we really love the work that you've done in homebrew in the community. And he mentioned the Diablo video specifically, and he asked if I'd be willing to build an emulation engine that they were looking at making because of up and coming projects that they were looking at partnering with companies on.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about this development generation limited runs, that they've been doing some of these reprints, and to me that side of the business is so valuable, to go back and get like these very hard to get games another print run. I mean, these are reprints. And it's totally legit for the. I know some people like in the community and collecting community would say like repros and things like this, and I'm always kind of quick to change that wording to reprints, because even back in the day there would be revisions and all these kinds of things, and even change a publisher.
Because here we actually have original development support, of course, right? They have officially supported this project, but more importantly, usually when you talk about repro, it's about reproducing something in a way that sort of replicates the original look, but it's not, like basically a fake. Where here, like, if you get whether it's the emulated version or you're getting the reprint of the cartridge, it's packaged in a way that doesn't really like step on the collector's market, right? It's a decidedly different product, and I think that's actually pretty key That's the key difference here, I think.
Because this is a game that it came out very late in the Game Boy Color's life. It came, I think Capcom did the original publishing.
They did, yeah. Yep.
But it was very limited print, and the composer of the game, Jake Kaufman, is a good friend of mine. So I remember, like, shortly after it came out, I just remember that already it was kind of like, it was rare the day it came out, basically.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people just didn't have the chance to play it, and not everyone fires up an emulator and checks out the game. So having the chance to go back and play this first one, because the thing about Shantae is that every subsequent game is so heavily based on the fundamentals that was in that first game. So it's really a fantastic modern experience, despite the fact that it's a retro game. So yeah, Shantae is such a perfect game for limited run to pick, and I'm very interested then to hear your take on the actual emulation side, because of the music, because of the graphics, this is a kind of demanding game for the hardware.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's probably one of the most demanding Game Boy Color games. I wouldn't say it utilizes any type of hacks or tricks to get, because there's some really great Game Boy and Game Boy Color games that do midline scan manipulations and stuff like that to get some really cool effects. This game has a little bit of that, especially some of the parallax scrolling in the dungeon levels. So it's definitely doing mid frame scan manipulation there, but it's not necessarily a game that like I think about like Prehistoric Man on the Game Boy. That does all sorts of crazy effects,
dude,
right?
It's so funny you bring that up.
That's
something
Joe's
that Audi and I
favorite game.
We've talked about this a lot, actually, haven't we?
Yeah,
because Prehistoric Man is very, very, very impressive.
Yeah, and
it has a very impressive intro.
It's also one of those games that doesn't behave well on most emulators out there, because there's always going to be some timing issue or some quirk. So Shantae isn't that demanding as far as making sure that the emulation is dead on accurate, right? But with that said, when I went into this project, we had a bit of a discussion early on, and that was, should we just license an emulator and do it that way, or should we build our own? And the consensus was we should build our own. And I think ultimately we did that because we can really tailor the emulation to the games that we want to produce, we want to deliver, we want to ship. With an emulator, they'll play the whole spectrum of Game Boy Color games, but they may not necessarily do them very, very well, or you may not be able to add specific quality of life features into that game. So I spent about 3 or 4 months building a Game Boy emulator, and the engine, we call it Carbon. That's kind of the name for it, the Carbon engine. And we've since added more systems to that engine, which we can talk about. But the Game Boy was the initial one, and that took about, like I said, maybe 3 to 4 months. And I spent a lot of time making sure that the CPU emulation was accurate. So each CPU instruction, the number of cycles it takes to execute is accurate. And there's some really great homebrew test cartridges out there that will literally just go through each CPU instruction and tell you if you've messed something up, so really great tools out there, right? And
that's super useful then, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very, very handy to do that. So with that information, and there's just some great documentation out there, like the Game Boy community out there is one of the best, because there's so much information out there to build your own emulator and to start looking at that stuff. So we did spend quite a bit of time ensuring that the engine would hold up and be suitable for the game. But I think ultimately, we did a great job, and I think it was the right approach, because it's one thing just to use an emulator in the release, but it's another thing to build out your own. And Limited Run are obviously now looking to the future to utilize this engine for more releases going forward. So I think ultimately that was the right choice.
Exactly, and I think that's actually something, because sometimes when you see these emulation releases, people tend to, they get agitated if you're like, say, building upon community efforts, right?
Right.
I feel like this makes it more pure. This is purely something that you specifically made for them. So
Yep.
I feel like it clears up any of those types of issues as well.
Definitely.
Speaking of clearing up, though, let's do the elevator pitch here. Like, what do you have to do to build an emulator? Like, how do you approach that and explain it to the layman?
So that's a good question, and I can kind of talk about, how I sold myself, I guess, when they were considering bringing me on. I'm a very visual kind of person, and I like to break things down into small tasks, because it's easier to say on day 0 I'm going to start writing code, and on day 100 I'm going to deliver an emulator. But a lot of publishers, a lot of dev shops are going to just look at you and say, we need more than that. So I started out by pretty much doing what most people that would build a Game Boy emulator would do, and that is run Tetris, right? Because Tetris is a very simple game to get up and running on it. It's like the Hello World equivalent of emulation, if you will. The game Tetris, it's a 32K size, and the Game Boy has 32 kilobytes of RAM, so there's no bank switching going on in there.
Right.
So
right.
the entire contents of the cartridge fits into the RAM, and it never changes, right? So my first kind of goal was, let me get Tetris up and running. And we're not even talking about Game Boy Color at this point. We're just talking about straight Game Boy, right? So
DMG.
DMG. And then
Oh yeah.
The Sharp's CPU has a lot of instructions. It has 255 and then a further 255 underneath that. So rather than just sitting there and coding each instruction one at a time, I basically ran Tetris, and every time there was a new opcode that was discovered, I would code it. And then it didn't take long for the game to kind of come to life, if you will. There were bugs, there were graphical issues, there were tile issues, but that was pretty much the first thing that I kind of gave them as a milestone and said, look, we can do this. We can get Tetris running. We can now complete the emulation portion of this, and then add the Game Boy Color enhancements. And Game Boy Color on top of original Game Boy isn't really that complex. There's the CPU is the same, so there's no new instructions you have to code. All you have to consider is the clock speed has been doubled, the amount of memory space has been increased. There's obviously things with VRAM have been changed as well, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. So the initial kind of pitch was, we'll build Game Boy. I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll move on to Game Boy Color, get those enhancements in, and then once that piece is in, then we focus on Shantae and getting that game looking good, running good, making sure things like input lag and all that stuff are as low as possible, and then talk about the UI that we build around the game and how to present that, and and ultimately ship it out.
So I am curious then, so you're going through all the opcodes, testing Tetris along the way, and obviously you start to introduce more complex games and ensure. How far did you take it, essentially? Did you actually fully implement the Game Boy Color?
Yes.
Is this something you can run Prehistoric Man on this?
Yes, that was one of my test games as well. I wanted to make sure that it could hold up, right? Look, I wouldn't say that, because there's some long-standing Game Boy emulators that have been around, for 10, 15 years.
Oh yeah.
But I think when you're talking about building an emulator for a commercial release, it's not necessarily going to be the most accurate. It's not necessarily something you'd put up against a Virtual Boy or a Sane Boy, because you really are tailoring your emulation around the game that you're building.
That's what I was kind of getting to, because you're targeting this game, so it feels like it's not necessarily necessary to do that.
Yes, that's correct.
We've seen this plenty of times with Nintendo's emulation.
Yep.
And various others, when you try to load ROMs, for instance, that go outside of what they were tailored to play, things start to break down.
Yep.
But it sounds like you actually went all the way here, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, we did that because, like I said, it was. This is not the first. This is not the only project that we're talking about. There's things that are coming up at some point that we'll continue to use the engine as well. So we wanted to make sure it could hold up with. I don't want to say 100% accuracy on everything because we quite honestly haven't tested everything. Yeah. But the things that I know that are kind of in the works, we've already looked at and. They all run pretty well. So
we have your guarantee that if Limited Run does Prehistoric Man, it will run.
That's right.
Yes, but I don't think Prehistoric Man is something that they're looking at doing. Unfortunately,
well, that needs to become our mission then.
Metal Masters recently, which has actually amazing music by Alberto Gonzalez, but the game itself, I mean, it's an Atari ST robot fighter, which. Isn't the best game, I'd say.
When you say those words, it sounds like a bad game to me. Atari ST fighting game.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you're getting a Rise of the Robots vibe all of a sudden, John, aren't you?
Oh, it's not that bad. I mean, it's better than Ultimate Fighter, which was a Samantha Fox fighter on the Atari ST Falcon. So another nod to Limited Run. Please do that game. We need the Samantha Fox game collection. It's like Strip Poker and the Ultimate Fighter. Music by Rob Hubbard, though. So
very cool, very cool.
How did we get on this topic? This happens every day.
Very easily.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing I want to ask about then is when it comes to obviously Game Boy games, they're very low resolution. It's like 192 by 160 or something like that.
160 by 144.
Oh, it's even lower.
I have that res burned into my mind.
I would think so by now.
As you can probably imagine.
So that's the issue then is you're presenting a very low resolution image, and it's likely to be played on larger screens.
Mm-hmm.
I actually haven't had a chance to play the Switch version yet. I'm actually waiting for a copy. And how did you handle the filters essentially? How did you determine what you wanted to do there?
Yeah, so there's 3 filters in the game. There's kind of the normal, so everything is integer scaled. I didn't want to deviate away from that. Yeah. So the kind of the normal setting is integer scaled, and then there's more of I think it's a 3x integer scale as well. It kind of shrinks the screen a little bit, and then we also added an LCD shader in there as well, just to give it that cool LCD look. So it looks really great if you're playing in portable mode, but I think overall having that integer scaled crispy look to it, even on a big 60-inch television, gives it a certain charm about it, and the game itself looks absolutely fantastic with its graphics and animation and the color palettes that are being used in that game. So it was really, really simple to just kind of blow it up because it still looks terrific either way.
Yeah, it's so late that it's almost like it takes this into mind. It feels natural even if you play it unfiltered, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it's such a showcase for the Game Boy Color that it's kind of the perfect Game Boy Color to release to showcase this kind of like a modern release, I'd say.
Yep.
The reprint is one thing, but when you play this on the Switch, and I've seen your video and stuff on this, and it just looks really natural to me to play it the way on portable or on the TV, and it's a smart business decision, I think, to start with Shantae. Of course, the WayForward relationship between Limited Run and them is really strong. So, but they got lucky here. I think you have to pick the right game to start this kind of business with, and what's better than Shantae?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good showcase of what the engine can do, and you're right. I mean, this also, will get used as a tool for the future, and talking to other potential partners about the engine that Limited Run has, and this is what we can do with this. So yes, I think it is a great showcase of what the engine can do and everything. I think honestly, it's probably one of the best first games to bring out for them.
I'm kind of curious though, because there has been even on the Switch itself, there has been other projects, and there are other developers doing similar stuff. Of course, you have like Digital Eclipse,
Digital Eclipse,
of course,
and
which
M2.
does great work.
M2,
M2 specifically on like the Mana collection. So did you look at what they had done already, and then like, okay, here's what was kind of your feeling? Not to, you don't need to specifically point out like, no, they didn't do this right, but was there anything you saw that like, man, no one's done this yet? I want to, this is what I want to bring to the table.
Well, I will say that I looked at both the work that M2 and Digital Eclipse have done, because I mean they're legends, in the industry. They've been doing this stuff for years, right? I mean, Digital Eclipse did the OG Xbox collections and on the PS2 and the GameCube. So they didn't necessarily do something that we put into our stuff that they weren't doing, but I did take a lot of, I don't want to say inspiration, but I looked at a lot of the more modern retro collections that have been coming out, and not just from them, but I looked at like the Namcot one that came out. I looked at Digital Eclipse's Lion King and Aladdin one that they had done, and really
the
just
Lion King.
it really was more about trying to understand the user experience, that we should present for this game, because it's easy just to, like you guys were saying earlier, just download the ROM and then give them an emulator, but don't put any type of presentation around it. But that wouldn't be much fun to anyone, especially you don't know, number one, you don't know how to play the game, number two, you don't know how to quit the game and all that stuff, right? So taking a look at how they presented, how they curated and how they provided the experience to launch into the game. But not only that, all these kind of collections usually have, an extras menu with like cool artwork or just something else, right? So we were very, very adamant that we would do the same. So we put an art book in there as well, and Matt Bozon was very gracious to submit a bunch of artwork for this release as well, which was fantastic. So we spent a lot of time looking at what everyone else was doing. We don't want to be better than M2 or Digital Eclipse, but we certainly want to provide an experience that is up there with what those guys are doing for sure.
One of the things I really liked that M2 did, you look back at their PS2 Sega Ages stuff, is they would often bundle multiple versions of the same game and other bonus content along with it. Was there anything for Shantae that potentially buried treasure, if you will, that could have been included as a bonus that maybe didn't make it in, or something like that?
So what was included was the Game Boy enhanced version of Shantae. So the Game Boy Color version, if you put that into a Game Boy Advance, it actually will have a little spinning image that says Game Boy Advance enhancements. And that was a additional game that we included as part of this bundle, which is kind of cool because it has a different, has a new transformation, the Tinkerbell transformation. It also has a different color palette, because you remember plugging in a Game Boy Color game into a Game Boy Advance, the color palettes have to be different, right, for it to actually look good on the GBA. So we left that intact. We didn't want to change the color palette to be what it was supposed to look like. We just left everything the way it was. So that game was included. So there's two versions of the game that comes with the release. There was also a third game that we were trying to get for this release. Unfortunately, it didn't make it. But that was the Game Boy Advance Shantae, which was unreleased. That I believe was cancelled. We did talk to WayForward about potentially getting that game for this release, which would have been great. But unfortunately, it was just not available. But it would have been nice to have included that into the release.
That's a shame. A lot of stuff from back then just gets lost, or people lose track of it over time, and it's a shame. But that would have been an awesome bonus.
Curious about also, we talked a lot about graphics and things like this, but I mean the music of Shantae on the GBC is quite legendary for good reason, because Jake, I mean, was probably one of the best composers on, retro hardware, or I guess at the time not retro, but he was someone that perfectly emulated the classical Japanese composing style for like 8-bit systems and stuff. How did you find any complications reconstructing the music driver and stuff, or did it all work pretty well for you?
No, sound was... It's one thing to build an emulator without sound, right? So I talked about the Tetris example, but adding audio and making it sound good or as authentic as possible is very complicated. But again, fortunately, there is some really great and specifically detailed documentation out there from the Game Boy development community that outlines, the way to get good Game Boy sound, good Game Boy audio. So it took quite some time. In fact, it was, I don't want to say it was the most the amount of time I spent in the development cycle, but it was a big chunk of it. And I remember there were a few early attempts that sounded pretty okay, but then you kind of listen to it compared to original hardware. And we spent a lot of time, A/B testing the game with original hardware. Fortunately, the limited run guys have a Game Boy Color and the original cartridge, so I was bugging them a lot about, can you send me audio files? Can you send me screen captures of the game? Because one of the things I wanted to make sure was, that this thing was, look, it's emulation, so there's always going to be a certain amount of input delay, right? There's always going to be those quirks associated with emulation, but we also wanted to make this as accurate as possible and as good of an experience as possible. So we spent a lot of time on the audio side, making sure that it sounded, authentic. And if you had played the Game Boy Color original, then you knew what this was. It didn't sound, any different to you or anything like that. And the Game Boy Color has, it's got audio in there, and it's got four channels, right? It's got the wave channel, the square channel, and the noise channel, and making sure that they're all mixed and sound correctly, and the appropriate stereo panning is in place. Took a lot of time and a lot of trial and error, and ultimately I think we did pretty good, and we got a really good audio representation of the Game Boy Color, which I was quite proud of in the end. I think we did a great job on it.
I'm so happy to hear. I mean, I know, of course, that you're a huge video game music guy like me.
Yeah.
But this is usually kind of, especially when it comes to Mega Drive stuff, but, that's notoriously difficult to kind of recreate. But with a lot of these, retro bundles and, compilations we've seen, I always get irritated because the music is always just kind of closely appropriated, but it's clear that whoever did the work, either it's licensed from an like older open source emulation or something like this, or it's just like that's not their forte. They don't really care about the sound as much as they do about the graphical interface.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's good to hear that you actually spent more time on the audio, because if you don't get that right, it's so much of the experience gone. And in Shantae, which is a musical driven game, it would have been detrimental, especially for someone like me who's buying this game a lot for the music. It would be kind of sad to hear that, like, oh man, they didn't nail the music. Like, that's such an oversight. But it sounds like you had the right frame of mind about this, and then spent more time on it.
Yeah, and I mean, we're very fortunate because the Game Boy, like you talk about the Genesis, the Genesis has different audio processing, and I don't think there's one emulator that's really nailed the audio. It's very, very difficult to get that audio correct, and then when you think you've got it correct, someone else may say it still doesn't sound like my Genesis does, because Genesis have so many different configurations.
But also, I mean, a lot of people use the sound chip, the analog nature of it, to produce some very unique effects, especially like the ladder effect, like getting that exactly right, really difficult.
Yeah. So ultimately, we weren't in a situation where we had to, think about all the different configurations. This was pretty straightforward. But to your point, Audi, we wanted to make sure that the audio was of a high quality, and people that know what the Game Boy is will have a good experience with this.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, when I was at E3 many years back now, in 2010, believe it or not, at the time I was speaking a lot with Hip Tanaka, so we met up for dinner. And I remember during that dinner we were talking about the Game Boy specifically, because he designed the Art of Hardware in the Game Boy.
Yeah.
And, he was talking so much about just the accuracy and just the sound of it and how proud he was of it. And strangely, the one he's most proud of is the Virtual Boy, believe it or not. He thinks that that's the most underrated and, misrepresented audio
the Virtual Boy hardware in general is actually pretty amazing for the
It
time.
is.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's wasted on their display mechanism.
Yeah, that's the thing. If just a few more months, then they probably could have at least had 5 colors. But yeah, I just remember that it's for him. The Game Boy hardware and the audio especially is so important, and he's making music today. On it still and releasing CDs, and he's a wonderful person. But I just remember that that conversation stuck with me, and it stuck with me a lot regarding these kinds of projects, because I remember how much he as a creator were talking about just his pride in it. And then you get compilations and whatnot that really don't sound right, or devices I guess we can say at games, where the sound is not that good.
Or what was it? There was that recent the small cube looking Game Boy thing, the little emulation.
Yeah, the Retron Squared or something.
That thing is horrendous.
Yeah,
really bad. So it's still a problem, and it seems like, I guess from a mainstream perspective, maybe the audio is always going to be kind of relegated as kind of it's not really music, which we can go into this. This is another
I think
topic for another day.
I mean, I don't know the answer to some of the kind of the cheaper retro devices like the Retron, but I do know that audio processing requires a certain level of CPU, right, or at least a certain level of processing, and I think a lot of the times these cheaper devices they tend to skimp over the audio side just to make sure that the games kind of run okay. I mean, I think that's what they're doing, right? But if you got dedicated game console hardware like the Switch that has good audio processing and has the appropriate number of threads that you can utilize to get a good audio experience, it really is geared for something more like that versus just a cheaper knockoff device.
So speaking of original developers and stuff, how much was WayForward kind of involved in the process?
Well, initially they really weren't that involved until we got the game up and running. So the first kind of cut that we showed WayForward was just the game running. So there was no front end, no anything. So you'd launch into it and it would just load the game. And we did this because we wanted to make sure that Matt Bozon was on board with this, and he was he would approve this work, right? That he liked what he had seen and everything, and we just wanted to get his feeling, his take on how it was looking and how it was playing. And I remember he did see the game and he was very, very excited about it for the first time, and that was I guess as far as pressure goes, that was a good moment for me that the creator of the game had given the thumbs up that we were onto something here. So that was great. So at that point we had started talking about, okay, well, how do we want to present this? We need a front end for this, and that's when WayForward really stepped in. So they provided all the assets for the menu screens and like I said, all the artwork and even the sound. So when you kind of go up and down on the menu and you press select and all that stuff, they provided sound effects, for all the different triggers and everything. So their involvement was pretty minimal at the start. They did step in and help with the UI, but one area where they really stepped in and helped out a lot, and God bless them, because they spent a lot of time on this, was the QA process. So we were at that point where we felt, Limited Run felt, that we had a solid release. So we started sending builds over to WayForward, and they started QAing, and they have a fantastic QA team led by Jeremy Pryor. Shout out to him. He was excellent. They started finding things that we hadn't considered, just the typical, it works on my machine developer mentality, but they found all sorts of things that were just things that I hadn't even thought about. So there was a pretty heavy QA process, and WayForward was very much involved in that. And that was a very iterative process until, they came back and said, I think we're good. I think we're ready to, to submit this to get certified at that point. So they started out pretty much hands off, and then towards the end, they were pretty much hands on the project.
So actually, thinking of the UI, is that your own creation? Did you build the whole UI yourself, or?
Mostly. So I put something together, and WayForward then kind of put the WayForward touches on it, I will say. And if you look at the front end, it's very reminiscent of some of the other Shantae games, the way it looks, the way it's presented.
Yeah, for sure.
So I made sure it kind of was in line with some of the other games. But initially, I put something together, and they kind of came in and helped out with that stuff.
So what about Limited Run then? Because of course, friend of the show, Joe. I know he's a stickler for like authenticity and. Wonderful person. But what was, because it sounds like you were doing a lot of this by yourself, but what was kind of Limited Run's involvement generally in development?
Joe and I would meet every week, and Joe was very, very helpful with the project. He did a lot of the I guess the management and the producing work that needed to be done. So anything that I needed, he would help out and get it for me. So if I needed assets, if I needed something from WayForward, he was kind of my go-to. So he was very helpful, and he knew what was going on most of the time with the project. But I think there was quite a bit of time, especially at the beginning, where they were mostly hands off. But they, like WayForward, kind of stepped in when they needed to, and look, they were fantastic to work with. They helped out where they needed to, and Joe and I still worked very closely together. And I think it was I guess for him, from his perspective, I'm this guy that he found on Twitter, after watching a Diablo video. So I guess he had a little bit of a point to prove as well, that did he pick the right guy for the job and all that stuff.
Oh,
and
right, of course.
His reputation and all that. And look, I think obviously the project was successful, and it worked out for both of us. So he's feeling very happy about everything. And
yes, he should. I've known Joe for a few years now, and I've been fortunate to work with him on a few projects myself. And he's very dialed in on the retro community. He's very, into preservation. So I'm sure he knew of you, and then knew that like this is the guy that's going to do it. So I don't think he had much doubt in his mind at all. So I'm very glad it worked out for both of you.
Yeah, and he's also he also likes to speed run games.
Yeah.
So he's a good test candidate for picking up the game and making sure that it feels good, on the Switch and everything, and making sure that we've dialed in the controls and even the control scheme and the button layouts and all that stuff. He was very, very good at helping with that stuff, because as a developer, you just say, I'm going to map this button to here, I'm going to map this button here. It doesn't matter, how it feels. I know that I need to press this button to jump, I need to press this button to attack, but his guidance and his vision, because he's obviously shipped games for many years before. He was very helpful with, this is the better layout system that we should be using for this, and many examples of things like that.
Yeah, he's, that's the thing about him, is that he's a good developer, first and foremost. So you can really trust his instinct on a lot of things. He's very jovial and very self-deprecating, so it's sometimes kind of hard to decipher whether or not like he does know. But then I see his work and I'm just like, okay, this guy. I remember because I've known Limited Run since the early 2010s. And I remember when he joined, it took me like 5 minutes after we met and we were like best friends. And I just knew that like this guy is gonna really help the company, and for every project he's worked on, that's been true. So huge shout out to Joe.
Yeah,
he doesn't get
awesome.
enough credit, I think, generally, but he is really awesome.
Yeah, agreed. He is fantastic to work with, and I will say that he's talked highly about you as well, Audi. But he did mention Bubsy, and he's like, I don't really get the Bubsy thing with him.
Oh, Bubsy's a good game. Like, I don't know where he has does he have no idea about good game design? Like, man,
well, he's just doing engineering work. He's
Joe doesn't know anything.
Making the games.
Actually, we've been joking for years that like he and I should do a Bubsy sequel where he tries his best to make it good, and I try my best to make it a Bubsy game, and somehow this would balance out and make an interesting project.
An amazing game.
I hope one day Limited Run will give us the opportunity with John Lindman as the voice of Bubsy.
Oh,
but
no.
You brought up certification, and this is another thing that's kind of curious for me, is that here you have a project that is emulating classic Nintendo hardware. It's not doing so. I mean, it's doing so officially, of course, now. Yes. But I mean, as you're working on it, did you have any kind of like thoughts on how is this going to go through certification? Will Nintendo react to this, or did you think they will just go straight through?
Well, it's a great question, and usually when you are, building a retro release of some games from past, there needs to be some changes that happen. So one of the things that we did was we removed any Nintendo specific branding in the game. So when you first load up any Game Boy Color game, due to the nature of the Game Boy, it will say licensed by Nintendo on the title screen, or maybe before it. So we stripped all that out. You mentioned Capcom published the game. Obviously, they're not involved in this release, so we replaced all that, all those tiles as well. So we did a little bit of, I'll say, ROM hacking before we submitted
Sprite
the game.
editing.
Just to make sure that the parties that were involved in this game in 2002 were no longer. So we did some of that, and we also made some slight changes to the button configuration as well. So what I mean by that is when you play the game, sometimes there'll be some text that says, and if you want to press your inventory, press the start button. But on the Switch, there is no start button. So we made sure that it said the plus button, as the start button. So we made some small changes as well where we needed to, just to make sure that the controls were in line with, the Nintendo Switch. So with those things in place, we felt pretty confident that it wouldn't receive any, it wouldn't get pushed back with any questions about, why does it have Nintendo branding in this game and stuff like that. Right. We made sure that we took all that stuff out. And if you take a look at any retro throwback release from M2 and Digital Eclipse, they usually do similar things with the ROMs that they use. They'll either just skip over the disclaimer screen entirely, or they'll just change it or something. So
another thing though I'm wondering about that just kind of came to mind is, so the Game Boy refreshes its screen at like 59.72 something hertz, which is different from what the Switch outputs.
Yep.
Did you choose to just sort of slightly increase the game speed?
Yes.
Or are you actually so that's what you're doing? Because
it's very
sometimes
very subtle.
Mixed,
very subtle. But we did increase it slightly just to kind of keep it in line with a 60 FPS or. Because
otherwise you get duplicate frames essentially.
Every so often
you get
you would get that. Frame. Yep. But it was definitely something that we looked at pretty early on and said we'll just bump it up to 60. It's. Eventually it will, go out of sync, I guess, with the original, but I think it's the better solution out of the two.
This sounds like an awesome project that you got to work on. Should definitely be proud of it. I've seen,
definitely.
Even during development, I can share a little thing is that I was curious how accurate this emulation would be, and I sent you some secret games that were
I remember this.
This will not run unless this is accurate enough. And then you did launch it right away, and you said it runs. So that was how I knew that, like, all right, this is legit. So, but just from your own opinion and perspective, like, what's some of the games that you wish you could work on now that the Carbon engine is done?
Ooh, yeah.
Do you have like some carrots dangling that, like?
Oh yeah. I mean, the Game Boy Color, there's some great games for it. I mean, obviously, you think about like some of the Mega Man games or Castlevania. The kind of the low hanging fruit. The Donkey Kong Country games would be cool to bring back as well.
Actually, thinking about, you mentioned Mega Man, which was supposed to get a release, I think, on DS
like
or something. Right?
Mega Man Mania was like the colored version of the Game Boy games.
I love those Game Boy games, and I would love to see like, and this kind of gets into this. What do you think about the possibility of essentially doing like a color hack on games that were originally black and white? Maybe updating them to work for Game Boy Color, maybe. Because some of that stuff exists, and I'd love to see that done officially.
It's like Super Mario Land 2, Metroid. These have had like, and it's not just colorized with like a Super Game Boy or anything like this. It's actually edited to have a palette, and it's very excruciating.
Game,
I've looked into it, and I mean, it requires a lot of additional coding.
I would definitely like to do that. I think where my skill set probably isn't great is picking the right color palettes. You know what I mean? Because like that's where you need a good 2D artist, right, to come in and really help you.
The Game Boy Color is really tricky there too, because the color palette it has is weird. It's like for green you have like pickle green, and like purples are like eggplant purple. Like it's all these strange shades that I suspect were picked due to the reflective nature of the LCD screen to sort of pick up color. But they look weird. They can look weird. Their Shantae uses pretty good colors.
It does.
Overall.
It's very vibrant, I mean, very vibrant. Well, I mean, for the future, all I can say that I hope, especially for the Game Boy future of the Carbon engine, is a point that I bring up to John every time we talk to Game Boy being reproduced, is that it really needs a good dot matrix shader where you have like the right, because a lot of the artwork that was made for the DMG era takes that into mind, so backgrounds and stuff, because usually it just is black and white on emulation, right? But it really needs that tint of green, and don't need the ghosting so much, but you do need a dot matrix grid.
Well, you're right. You don't really want the ghosting usually, but there's a lot of games. There's games that use that to create effects, like Batman Return.
That's the big one,
where it's like they have that amazing water effect where they're kind of like manipulating the scan lines, but it's like every other frame. Like one frame it's just a white out area, and then the next frame it's like updating the water, and it flashes rapidly back and forth, but because of the slow response time of the Game Boy screen, it ends up looking like transparent water. And it's really cool, but it doesn't obviously work well when you emulate it because modern displays are too fast. So it just looks like it's flickering.
It's something where
it's a tricky thing.
RetroArch and like I think the Mystery even now, they've kind of been able to reproduce a good like shader for the Game Boy, and I actually do enjoy playing Game Boy a lot on RetroArch due to that, because I can kind of get very close to the original feels. I would hope for the future of DMG releases that you guys look into a good dot matrix filter for the Carbon engine.
We're already enhancing the engine, I will say. I mean, the first release of this was good, but we're already thinking about how to make this better subsequently, and getting some more features in there. One of the things that we wanted to get in that didn't make the cut, unfortunately, but we may bring it in as a patch later on, is a rewind feature. So we have save states in the game to add quality of life, but that hold down the left trigger to rewind the game a couple of seconds is something that we're looking at implementing, and we probably will get that in at some point. So we're always iterating, we're always adding things that make sense, and we'll continue to do so over time.
And we can note, as of this recording, Limited Run did put out a notice that if you are a programmer, if you're watching this interview, they are looking for additional staff to work with you on this engine.
Yeah, I can talk about that real quick. So we, as in Limited Run, there's a lot of projects coming down the pipe. So really, it's a matter of, we need some more help now, right? So there's projects that are in the works right now that require some more hands. So we're looking for developers that can assist. If you have any experience with emulation, old retro systems, please send us your resume. We'll definitely take a look at you.
Cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for this one. So thank you very much for joining us to talk about it. It's always a pleasure. So,
thank you, gents. I always love to chat with you guys. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Of course, and thanks for co-hosting with me as often as the case, Audi.
Oh, it's so much fun. I couldn't pass it up with MVG on the roster here, so
absolutely
hope to do it again soon, and live streams and many things in the future.
Definitely. And of course, thank you to everyone that has watched the video all the way to this point. If you have made it this far, be sure to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, all the stuff you're supposed to do on YouTube. It actually does help. So until next time, though, this is all of us signing off. He's just shipped a new game, Shantae, the original Game Boy Color game. But first, actually, hold on, let me do that. I'm going to do that again, actually, because I want to get Audi introduced first and then roll into that. So let's try that again. Okay.
I was hoping you were going to slip and make me sound like I had done all that work.
Oh, that would have been funny, actually. Okay.